From the opening tip-off to the final buzzer of the big dance, this is where the madness lives. The roar of the student section, we hear it. The bracket-busting upsets, we predict them. The legends in the making, we've got the stats on lock. Whether you're a die-hard alum or a casual fan of the chaos, you're officially on the clock. This is the pulse of the court. This is the home of the hoop. And this is Hardwood Gameday. And now, the man who lives and breathes the game, here's your host, Trevor Williams.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of Hardwood Gameday, presented by yours truly, Trevor Williams. We're giving you the best games to kick us off before going into the noon slate of college basketball for men's and women's on this glorious Valentine's Day. Yes, love is in the air, but in the world of sports, we like to call that tough love. So you can't get much better than this on Valentine's Day, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get the show on the road. We got the men's, got some teams in the bubble, who can make it into the tournament, who gets left out. We got all that all broken down for the men, but the women, the crowning game of this evening on Valentine's Day is South Carolina versus LSU, and number 3 versus number 6. But we'll get much later into our program about that breakdown and how that matchup is going to shake out between those two schools and a good SEC showdown on Valentine's Day. Like I said, it's tough love out here with a couple matchups, a double dose of Michigan and Michigan State for women's college basketball as well. Some Big 12 showdown, but it's a lot of Big 12 showdown this week, ladies and gentlemen. You just can't get much close of competitiveness with that. Like I said, you can follow me on my socials, TWilly624, and also go support all of our other shows on the Empty the Bench Network, our ETB. Follow that so you can stay up to date for our latest and greatest on content, ladies and gentlemen. But let's dive in for today's topic. For the men's side of things, Kansas versus who's number 9 in the nation versus Iowa State, ladies and gentlemen. Men's college basketball today at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific Time on ABC. I haven't wanted to say Fox because, you know, a lot of the primetime slots at noon is Fox. It's that college football that's driven in me. But we're talking about hoops and action today, ladies and gentlemen. You just can't beat the intensity of that matchup, of course. But we'll see how things unfold in the days and weeks of the tournament. But breaking this down, ladies and gentlemen, Kansas has a great record in the Big 12. Not too shabby, 19-5 with a Big 12 record of 9-2, ladies and gentlemen. What a tremendous campaign they have been going on in the Big 12. But a little bit of a rocky start. But going up against Iowa State, ladies and gentlemen, Iowa State is 21-3. Their only losses have come in conference play, ladies and gentlemen. Outside of that, they have been dominant across the board. Outside of that, but when you look at their conference play, they're 8-3 in the Big 12. Not too shabby, looking pretty fresh, pretty clean, if you ask my thoughts on how they're playing. But their chance to win this game, ladies and gentlemen, is about a 73.3% chance for Iowa State to win this matchup. Kansas, on the other hand, is about a 26.7% chance to come back and win this game. We got to be on our toes. It's at a 1 o'clock slate. But if you're in the central time zone, it's a high noon showdown, if you ask me. You just can't get much better than that. For sure, ladies and gentlemen. But the stat line goes to show you common opponents, they don't really – well, they're only a common opponent that they had in the last 5 games, ladies and gentlemen, is Kansas State. So when Kansas played Kansas State, the score was 86-62, ladies and gentlemen. And Kansas walked out with a good – solid victory across that margin. However, ladies and gentlemen, when Iowa State played Kansas State, it was 95-61. That's how big of a margin this is, how much of an impact that it has going into things for sure, ladies and gentlemen. So I like how it's starting to shake up in the Big 12 conference play. But you look at some of their other 5 games, Iowa State lost to TCU 62-55, but they beat Baylor 72-69, knocked off Colorado 97-67, and beat Oklahoma State 84-71. Pretty solid across the board, if you ask me. And for Kansas, ladies and gentlemen, they beat up on Arizona and won 82-78, beat Utah 71-59, beat Texas Tech 64-61, beat BYU 92-82, ladies and gentlemen. That's what they got going on in the Big 12. 2 teams jockeying for position, trying to make a statement, and how that is going to unfold them for sure. I'm just going to try to get a quick looking at the standings of the Big 12 to see how these 2 schools are shaking up across the border of everything for the most part. And my computer wants to cooperate, but yes, here we go. So if we look at the Big 12 conference, Arizona sits on top, and their only loss is to Kansas, ladies and gentlemen, who's been having a good solid start, sitting 3rd in the Big 12 right now with how they are going with it. But Kansas, on the other hand, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't have a good, strong road record. They're 4-3, but have a dominant home record with 11-1. Iowa State has a solid home record, stand at 13-0, but again, tricky on the road for them with a 4-3 road record as well. So it's definitely going to be an interesting matchup for sure in this one, ladies and gentlemen. But it is jockeying for good seeding in the Big 12 conference as we get inch closer and closer to the conference tournaments here on going into the middle of February, rounding us out before we get into the craziness of March Madness, ladies and gentlemen. But that's where everything is. The teams that are in chronological order and rankings in the Big 12 are Arizona, who's top in the conference, followed up by Houston, then Kansas, Iowa State, Texas Tech, BYU. So if you look at like the last 5 games for Kansas, ladies and gentlemen, they have had a lot of the upper echelon of the top people in the conference and beating them close, if not convincingly, in some of the matchups. So that looks pretty darn good if you ask me. And out of their ranked opponents, they got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 6 teams ranked in the top 25 thus far, ladies and gentlemen. So as you take a look at how this breakdown is going to be broken down, it's just going to be a good, hard-nosed basketball game, and the stats are what's going to break this down. So let's get down into the nitty-gritty of the stat selection, ladies and gentlemen. Iowa State averages about 84.6 points per game compared to Kansas's 78 points per game. Now, if you look at points given up, it kind of is edged in Iowa State's favor with about 65 points given up compared to Kansas's 68 points given up. From the field, Iowa State shoots better from the field with a 51% compared to Kansas's 48% from the field. Rebounds, ladies and gentlemen, goes to Kansas with a 39 rebounds on average per game compared to Iowa State's about 37. Assists goes to Iowa State with 18.5 compared to Kansas's 15 steals on average, not steals, assists on average. Then the block party, ladies and gentlemen, get that block going with the blocks going on for these 2 teams with a 6.2 compared to Iowa's 3 blocks per game on average. And then the steals, the Iowa Cyclones are very steely out there with about 9 steals on average per game compared to Kansas's 5.5 steals per game. So as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, it's definitely going to be an interesting matchup on how this is going to unfold between these 2 squads, ladies and gentlemen. But like I said, if you look who the teams that Kansas has played, they are playing the top teams within the Big 12. Like in their last 5 games, they played BYU, who's like below them in the whole conference seating, like maybe number 5 or 6 in the Big 12. But they beat Texas Tech and they beat Arizona, and that gives Arizona like their only loss of the year. So Kansas is a decent ball club as they have been in years past. They've just been not as a posing of a threat of getting to the Final Four or Elite Eight as what we've seen in recent years, but they're still a team that gets there and gets the job done. But then Iowa State has been lurking around, taking care of business, but then losing to TCU does hurt them in that contention for that spot, ladies and gentlemen. So that's how this matchup is going to be shaken down on this day of Big 12 matchup in men's college basketball. Probably the best matchup that we're going to get all day within the ranked opponents and things that will keep you on the edge of your seat to keep you steadfast until we get to some of the women's games that are happening tomorrow, if not, kicking things off with, South Carolina and LSU as we start to close our program out later in today's show. But we got to start breaking the things down. The men's bubble, ladies and gentlemen, men's March Madness bubble watch, as we all like to see who's in, who's a definitely lock, who's on the bubble, who has work to get the job done. Like I said, it's going to be a tough defiance of how ESPN has this lockdown. But here's how we're going to break it down. The locks, how ESPN has it. Teams that are locked that would need a significant change in momentum to miss the cut. So they're a guarantee, like if they have a star player that goes down, that was probably eliminates them from the whole picture. But they have to have a significant switch to have this team miss. Like they lose every game from that point forward. The should be in teams are teams trackingly safely above the cut, but not immune to trouble. Most likely, these teams hear their name called on March 15th, though their fate is not yet secured. And there's about currently 12 teams that should be in, but we won't know until selection comes upon us. Then you have teams to work to do. How ESPN breaks it down, ladies and gentlemen. It's teams who are up and coming. Results will meaningfully change their fate for the good or bad. These are true on the bubble teams because of their chance close to a coin flip. And there's about 16 teams out there that are a coin flip where if they do take care of business in conference play, they're in. If they don't, they're out. So it's just like how that goes in. And then our favorite, ladies and gentlemen, the long shots, the Cinderellas, the things that we believe that keeps us on our edge in the bubble hunt, the teams where they have to have the defying the all odds, defying the gravity moments, the buzzer beater half court shot. These are the long shots that we are talking about, ladies and gentlemen. And the criteria of this is teams that would need to outperform expectations or benefits of chaos. There is little to zero chance that these teams will make the big dance without winning their conference tournament. That's the long shots we're talking about. The teams that have to have that Cinderella run to make a statement, to be a part of the big dance in March, ladies and gentlemen. Like it's like Valentine's Day. You got to find your date to the dance, and this is a prime way to secure your date to the dance by winning on Valentine's Day right here, ladies and gentlemen. So you can see my little pun that I did there with March Madness and Valentine's Day, because I know when kids grow up in school, there's always that Valentine's Day dance in middle school, and that's always a big thing. But let's start breaking things down in the teams in the bubble watch, ladies and gentlemen. We have the teams that are kind of locked in the Big Ten right now. You have, I'm just going to try to get to the, conference standings to help us get us a better picture. The teams that are locked in kind of make the most sense. You have Michigan, Illinois, Purdue, Nebraska, and Michigan State are true teams that are locked in the Big Ten going to March Madness. And that kind of holds true. If you kind of look at the Big Ten standings, Michigan's 1, Illinois 2, Purdue 3, Nebraska is 4. Then you have Wisconsin in there because they have a better overall record, I want to say, within conference play. But then you have Michigan State. So that's where that kind of lives for the most part. So I like those teams. Now, if Wisconsin wins the Big Ten, then you have a case for them to be a possible lock-in. But I think as how ESPN has them, they have them as a should be in, depending how things go out. The other should be in teams, we have Iowa, which I kind of agree with as well. Outside of Wisconsin, Indiana, again, a basketball school, but since they won the national championship, they're going to try to say we can be both. We can be a basketball school and a football school. So if they win a national championship in football and somehow do it in March Madness, that would be a year that every sports fan that has to deal with is the Indiana Hoosiers doing it in both sports. And I don't think the world of college hoops, as well as college football, can handle the state of Indiana and the Indiana Hoosiers talking about them winning the national championship in football and in basketball. I don't think the world is ready for all that energy that the Hoosier fans have, for sure, ladies and gentlemen. But then you have UCLA Bruins. Again, I kind of agree how they're looking right now. In the conference in the Big Ten, they're 9-4 with an overall record of 17-7. Good homestand record, but when you get to March Madness, the home court goes away. It's a neutral site, but can you get the job done? Now, granted, if they play in a division that suits them closer to California, then yes, there's some home court advantage to it in the later rounds. But let's get to the business, ladies and gentlemen. It's a neutral site. You got to get the job done. But when you're in your region, people travel well for some schools in those scenarios. So that's kind of where the Big Ten lines up in that picture, ladies and gentlemen. And then the teams that have work cut out for them, the teams that need help, the Ohio State Buckeyes got some tough in there. And just looking at how Ohio State's shaking out, conference record's not too impressive. 8-6 overall, but with an overall, record in their season 16-8. Good, decent, home record stand of 11-3, but with AP poll matchups, they're 0-5. Not too great if you're asking me for ranked matchups. So when you get to March Madness, you're dealing with teams that are possibly ranked, if not, have been on the bubble of trying to get ranked all season. So that's what we're kind of dealing with. USC's in the same cut of the throat, ladies and gentlemen, with being 7-7, with a overall record of 18-7, not too pretty, and then with a overall home record of 9-3, with an away record of 5-4, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, USC has been struggling across the board. And then the long shot is Washington, the Huskies. Overall conference record 4-10, ladies and gentlemen. Not too pretty of what we got going on here on Hardwood Gameday, ladies and gentlemen. Let me get some water to refresh my quench of the Big Ten as we move on to the glorious SEC. And they're probably at the bottom of this rankings. How we got Southeast Conference. So are locked in the SEC now, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I kind of agree in some spots, but in other spots, not so much. So we got Florida, Vanderbilt, Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Kentucky, which kind of makes sense. If you look at the conference rankings, we have Florida, Kentucky, Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama, Vanderbilt. Again, looking pretty solid across the board. All teams are in good contention about, a game or two back from each other from Vanderbilt up. So, like it, can live with it. They're all close to each other with their overall records. Florida is 18-6. Kentucky 17-7. Arkansas is 18-6. Tennessee is 17-7. Alabama 17-7. And then Vanderbilt's sitting on top looking pretty with 20-4, but their losses have come in conference play. So that's where Vanderbilt is lurking. Now, granted, they can have a great conference tournament run, get the job done, and get a good seat overall and knocking off these teams. But that's what the tall test that they have. Teams that should be in might be a little bit of a head scratcher. Auburn Tigers should be in, according to the person who created the report. Let me make sure I get their name to give you some context. The person's name is Neil Bain. I'm not going to pronounce his last name. I'm going to butcher it. But the gentleman's name is Neil, and his last name is Paine. So do that with what you will. He was the one who ended up writing this article. And I agree with him for the teams that are locked in. But Auburn's a bit of a stretch right now, if you ask me. I know their next game against Arkansas, they can switch it around, but their conference record, ladies and gentlemen, is 5-6. It's not easy. And then after that, they have Georgia as well with another 5-6. Now Georgia's a little better with 17-7 overall record, but the Auburn Tigers, ladies and gentlemen, 14-10. I can't wrap my head around it. Like, what in the world is that? You gotta be kidding me with that mindset of having them being a possible in. Oh my goodness. I can't wrap my head around it. Yeah, like I know I touched on about that, but then you have Texas A&M as a possible one. Yes, they're a better chance of getting it. They have an overall conference record of 7-4. Now, a couple loss goes their way. They can snake their way through and get into the tournament for sure. But you got to win when it matters the most. That's how we are looking at how the SEC is shaking out to do. Then work to do. Texas is right behind Texas A&M, and Missouri is also playing Texas. So how this is going to break out between Missouri and Texas. If Missouri wins, it helps them with their conference record. Texas needs it's a do or die scenario for this. So if Missouri loses, it hurts their chance, but they're still okay. It puts them now 3 games back behind the field. But beating Texas kind of reduces Texas's chances of getting through and making, a good run at the SEC tournament run, I should say. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the long shots of this all. LSU is a long shot. I kind of agree with this. Ole Miss being a long shot, I agree with that. And then Oklahoma. Why are you saying that Oklahoma is a long shot? At that point, you're just saying that every SEC team has a chance of getting in. But the crazy thing that you notice about when I went through the teams, I didn't mention South Carolina. I didn't mention Mississippi State. They were left out of the picture. But they're saying that Oklahoma has a long shot, but they have zero chance. Like, mind-blowing. At that point, it's basically they're just trying to say it's the SEC Invitational. Is that what we're going for? I don't know. Let's go up to the ACC, ladies and gentlemen, the Atlantic Coastal Conference, and how that is breaking down for everything in that conference. Now, I kind of like it. It kind of reflects the top of the top, which makes the most sense. Like Duke, Virginia, Clemson, North Carolina State, Miami, Louisville, and North Carolina, which are lock-ins according to Neil's article. We got Duke, Louisville, Virginia, North Carolina, Clemson, and NC State. Like that. The should-be-ins, with some help here and there, MSU has a chance of getting in. And then I'm guessing his other one is Virginia Tech. No, he's saying Miami has a should be in. I agree with that where they're ranking, 5th in the ACC with a conference record, 8-3 as well. To figure this all out in the world of the ACC, ladies and gentlemen. As we see, the teams that have work to do are Virginia. Well, I should say Virginia Tech has work to do with a conference record 6-6. But however, their overall record's not too bad. They're 17-8. Home record is 12-2, looking relatively good across the board. If you ask me, they, just got to get a couple wins in the conference and they'll be okay. Same with Cal. Cal's a little bit in a darker spot. I would say they're about 5-7 in conference play, so they need some help and some love to get the job done. On top of that, so not an easy task, if you ask me. And then to round things out, long shots, you got Stanford and Wake Forest. I don't think you have much to do with that. I would say, in my opinions, the long shot with Wake Forest, they're 8-3 in the conference. They're really not going to get into the ACC conference play, and for the most part, Stanford has a chance because they're lurking in the same spot as Cal being 5-7 in the record, and Stanford has a 16-9 overall record. There are some possibilities to get through for that as well. Now, if we look at the Big 12, as I mentioned, as we have the 9-5 matchup of Kansas and Iowa State that's happening today at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific Time on ABC, you have a lot of teams that are pretty solid in the Big 12. They have, like I said, they got 6 teams that are ranked in the top 25. You have the number 1 team in the nation of Arizona, followed up by Houston, Kansas, who's number 9, Iowa State is number 5. So right there in the top 10, you got 4 teams within the top 10 for the Big 12. Then followed up, just outside of the top 15, you got Texas Tech, and then rounding things out, you got BYU. Love how they have things kind of ironed out, kind of shaking things through and through, ladies and gentlemen. But the lock-ins, I kind of agree with. The 6 teams I mentioned are all the ranked teams. You got Texas, you got Arizona, Houston, Kansas, Iowa State, Texas Tech, and BYU, which makes sense in the Big 12. Which when you got 6 teams that are ranked, those are your kind of lock-in teams. Then there one team that is should be in is the UCF Golden Knights, ladies and gentlemen. They have a 6-5 record in conference play. Could claw their way back up. They are, the number 7 team in the Big 12. So they're most likely going to make the Big 12 tournament, which, doing fairly well. Overall record for them this season, 17-6. Again, not too shabby if you ask me. I like where they're at. They're doing okay, middle of the pack. But you just got to claw your things out and get things taken care of. Like Saturday, they got a game against West Virginia. And beating West Virginia helps them maintain and climb up and possibly pass BYU if BYU loses. So, again, win now, get your hot streaks going a little bit, but can't get too hot. You got to save the hotness for the tournament. And then once you're in your conference tournament, that's when you start building. You start compounding your wins so you can gear up to get those compound early wins in March Madness when the time comes for sure, ladies and gentlemen. Then your teams that need to do work, TCU, right behind West Virginia, 5-6 overall. Then you have Oklahoma State with a 4-7. I think their hopes are starting to get dashed, if you ask me. Yet they got TCU. West Virginia got UCF. They got work to do as well. Another 6-5. But like they said, they got to take care of business. It's going to be interesting when you got teams to deal with that. Then you have teams that are a long shot in the dark. Baylor, Cincinnati, and Arizona State. Then you have the Big East, ladies and gentlemen. The Big East Conference. UConn sitting on the top of the throne with 23-2, followed up by St. John's and Villanova. All teams that normally have, when they get into the tournament, they normally perform well. So I like where they're at. Overall, outside of that, there shouldn't be any other teams lurking. Maybe a Seton Hall because they're 17-8, but according to Neil's article, they're not there. They're just not. And then, the teams that have work, like I said, Seton Hall has work to do. It's not a should be in, but winning their conference, slipping in, knocking off Butler will springboard them back a little bit. But again, they kind of need to win the conference tournament to be able to get there. But it's not an easy task with Creighton, Blue Jays right behind them, as well as being another possible long shot. So, but they are a good long shot because they're 13-12. And then you have like other conference plays, ladies and gentlemen, like Gonzala, St. Louis, Billikey, and then you have Utah State Aggies in the Mountain West. And then you got, I should be in St. Mary's, Gales, and then you have St. Clara Broncos, and then you kind of walk things out. But you have Miami of Ohio, even though they have been having a great season thus far, maybe possible first-round upset. But according to this article, they got some work to do, and I think they do. But they just got to keep poised, keep the momentum going, keep the big wheel turning, and keep turning those heads, and they can reach the dance and be set up for March Madness success, if you ask me. I definitely do agree with that. They're still 25-0, great, fantastic year. I don't think you can see much to it. Now, Akron is also looking pretty good with 20-5, ladies and gentlemen. Kent State not too far behind with 18-7. So that's how the MAC conference is looking at. We got to go out and support the MAC conference since I'm relatively close to it. Though I have no ties or any connections to it, it's just in my backyard outside of the Big Ten. Like they're the conference that I kind of need to start supporting when I can support. Again, I got these schools where it's a car ride away, where I just say hop up, wake up Saturday. If there's a game later in the evening, just drive out there. So maybe next year, 2027, I make the trek to some of these smaller schools, go and play, not play, but go on those campuses, get a basketball game here and there, and figure out the whole parking scenario, get in and get out. Maybe try some local campus eateries while I'm there, make some staples. Again, it's in my backyard. Max, I'm probably driving 2 hours. So normally probably after Gridiron Gridlock, I pack up my bags. We just jet down, maybe go to Miami, Ohio. We go down to Athens, Ohio, just check things out. Bowling Green and Toledo, going up in that direction. That's about a 2-hour drive for me in those two directions. That's taking Interstate 75 for me, going up to Toledo and going up to Bowling Green. So definitely takes care of business. I mean, the furthest I could go up into is like Central Michigan, Eastern Michigan, and Western Michigan. Ball State might be a tricky one. UMass will be a difficult one, and Buffalo will also be a different one. Either Northern Illinois will be a difficult one to attend to. But hey, we can make some of these MAC games happen. I get a co-host with me that's in Ohio. We go out, we get some filming in, we do, live mics, go to the games, have a good time. I think that sounds like a great idea. So I might need to find a co-host that can travel out to some of these games with me, and we link up and have a good time, if you ask me. I think that kind of ends up almost rounding things out for teams on the bubble. San Diego State is another one. Same with New Mexico and UVC. Boise is another team that's out there. And then you have a lot of teams in the long shot like Akron, Yale, Dayton, Grand Canyon, Liberty, George Madison, South Florida, Tulsa, Belmont, Bruins, and Nevada. I know I'm missing others, but we know where those teams kind of reside. So that's kind of wraps up the men's side of how the bubble's looking, how things are shaking out, ladies and gentlemen. But now we're getting to the fun part of Valentine's Day and the tough love in women's college basketball. There are some great matchups in the women's side of things, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just making a few adjustments, and we're going to start kicking things off with some rivalries. Within rivalries, we like to say it's tough love. You respect them, but you also hate them at the same time. You got to keep it class, but I know tension can flare in rivalry games. But this time, we're talking about North Carolina, number 21 in the nation, versus Duke, number 11 in the nation. Women's college basketball, February 15th, after Valentine's Day, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific Time on ABC, ladies and gentlemen. ACC action at its finest. Like, these two women's programs right now, to give you a frame of what we're talking about, this is the number 1 team in the ACC, Duke, versus the number 3 team in the ACC, North Carolina. Overall records are pretty much strong. However, Duke is undefeated in ACC play, 13-0, and North Carolina is 10-3. However, the team that separates them is Louisville at 13-1 in conference play, but Louisville's having a dominant year with a 23-4 record. Duke, on the other hand, is 18-6. North Carolina is 21-5. So overall record looks pretty strong for these two teams. But again, all the way across the board, these two women programs have been just duking it out against one of each other, and just having a well-rounded performance, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think we can wrap our head around based on how great this matchup is. I mean, we have some data points where we can take a quick look about how good these teams are. Duke did play Louisville and gave them their only loss in the season in the conference play, and that score came down to the wire with 59-58. However, if we look at common opponents like SMU, North Carolina beat SMU 94-42. However, ladies and gentlemen, Duke beat SMU 95-36. So again, Duke has the better stat line across the board. And even if we want to take a quick peek at Wake Forest when they had, within their last 5 games, North Carolina beat Wake Forest 84-56. However, when Duke played Wake Forest, it was 80-44. So again, Duke is having that defense. And we can look at the stat lines to it. These two women's programs have a good, solid foundation. They're almost averaging 10 steals a game between both of these programs. Very, very good. And on top of that, the assists look miraculous. Duke is averaging about almost 18 assists per game compared to North Carolina's 16 assists per game. Block party, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to call it block party instead of just blocks. We're just going to call it block party. We're going to have 6 blocks per game for Duke compared to North Carolina's 3.5. Rebounds, 41 compared to 39 for North Carolina. From the field, ladies and gentlemen, it looks pretty solid, about 46 for North Carolina and 45 for Duke. Defensive-wise, relatively similar. North Carolina edges this one out with a 57 points given up compared to Duke's 58. Now, on top of that, points per game on average, both averaging about 76. Looking pretty good across the board. However, ladies and gentlemen, Duke has a better chance to win this game. At 72% chance to win this game compared to North Carolina's 27 on average. So again, a very solid matchup, if you ask me, going up for this matchup. So give me Duke to win this one. Like I said, it's a great matchup for that as well. But now let's steamroll and press forward. The SEC also has some great matchups today as well, ladies and gentlemen. Not today, as well as today as well as tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just trying to scroll down to the SEC section of the things. So we have Ole Miss, who's number 14 in the nation, versus Kentucky, who's number 18 in the nation. Women's college basketball, February 15th, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific Time on the SEC Network, ladies and gentlemen. What do we got here? We got some stuff that's cooking real good here. Ole Miss's record in conference play is 7-3 with an overall record of 20-5. Kentucky, on the other hand, a little struggling with 6-6, but overall conference record 19-7. looking pretty good if you ask me. Looking pretty darn good. Now, it's not going to be easy if you ask me. Common opponents, Vanderbilt is the sore thumb. Like Kentucky, I feel like is on a terrible losing streak right now. But Ole Miss destroyed Vanderbilt in a convincing fashion, 83. I should say destroyed, 83-75. However, Kentucky lost by 1 point, 84-83. So that's where they kind of lie. Nothing too flashy, nothing too miraculous. However, they did play Arkansas. Ole Miss won 80-57. Kentucky won 93-73. All right, what's going on here, Kentucky? You can play when you want to play, but you're struggling when you're struggling. Like you gotta lock in, ladies. You gotta show what Kentucky basketball is. You just can't go out there and then lose to teams when you shouldn't be losing to. Let's make that clear. There's ways for you to win this game. Now, granted, they've been having their ups and downs. You got the rebounds, about 41.5 rebounds per game from the field, about 44% from the field, averaging about 76 points per game. Blocks about almost 7 blocks per game. Steals, just not a team that likes to steal. They're honest. They just want to say, here, take your shot. We're not going to be scrappy. We're going to steal the ball from you. But on the other hand, Ole Miss saying, we'll be scrappy and we'll steal that ball from you about 9 times a game. And blocks, they don't do a lot of block parties. They got 5 blocks per game on average. Assists, they like passing the ball, but they're a little selfish about 14.5 points. 14.5 assists. From the field for Ole Miss is about 45.5. Not too shabby. It's just going to be what it is. And 77 points right there, ladies and gentlemen. And then rounding things out with 57.2. Not too shabby if you ask me how this game's going to unfold. So that's kind of where they lie. It's very important within how they end up shaking out in the SEC. A lot of the teams in the SEC are ranked relatively well, almost like it feels like half the conference is ranked. So it does help them out in tournament play of trying to get in when they need it the most, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm just going to slide on up to the Big 12 conference to see how things are shaking out there, ladies and gentlemen. One second, guys. Almost had a sneeze. Ooh. But now let's talk about some Big 12 action. Some high noon physicality, but it's late at night. The midnight hour, well, not really the midnight hour, but 8 p.m. primetime slot on FS1, 5 p.m. Pacific time. West Virginia, number 19 in the nation, versus TCU, women's college basketball. TCU is number 17 in the nation. It's a tall task, and not an easy task, but a tall task. But it's two freight trains colliding at each other. I shouldn't really say that analogy because train wrecks are very, very serious. But you get the analogy. Two teams that are basically making their way, jockeying for position, trying to make their statement in the Big 12, where West Virginia, the Lady Mountaineers, sit on top with a conference record of 11-3 compared to TCU's record of 10-3. So they're like a half a game back, TCU, but winning it will bring you closer and surpassing West Virginia and helping a lot of teams in the field. But it's going to be a solid performance. West Virginia is 21-5 compared to TCU's 22-4. Like it while you're not. However, ladies and gentlemen, TCU is 15-0 at home, ladies and gentlemen. I like those odds, but sometimes things don't go as what you planned. West Virginia, ladies and gentlemen, is 7-1 on the road. So it's a tough one in the Big 12 for sure, ladies and gentlemen. But the stats, the games that they played against each other, looking around, I mean, you have a common opponent in Baylor, where West Virginia won by 10, 70-60. However, TCU won against Baylor 83-67. Like I said, it's one of those things where you don't know what you're going to get out for the most part. But then you have them losing to Colorado by 80-79. However, West Virginia won in a close fashion, as 61-55. Probably some fouls that probably ended up separating that game towards the tail end. But however, ladies and gentlemen, when West Virginia played UCF, they won 106-56. I mean, this West Virginia team can put up points. That's why they're top in the Big 12. However, ladies and gentlemen, on average, TCU averages about 80 points a game compared to West Virginia's 78. Points given up, West Virginia is at 59 compared to TCU's 50, we'll just round up to 56. From the field goes to TCU about 49% from the field. And ladies and gentlemen, West Virginia goes in with the bracket of a 46% from the field. Rebounds go to TCU about 41 rebounds per game compared to West Virginia's 37. Then assists goes to TCU with 18 compared to West Virginia's 15. West Virginia does not do block parties whatsoever. They're about 3 blocks on game on average. They average about 6.2. TCU is a little bit of a block party with a 5, but not too drastic. But the steals of West Virginia, they're just creating a turnover machine with 12 compared to TCU's 7, almost 8 steals on average per game. But like I said, TCU is a better team across about 68% chance to win compared to a 31% chance to win, ladies and gentlemen, for West Virginia. Definitely going to be a close one. I like that TCU is going to edge this one out, and it's going to be very, very entertaining to watch on February 15th, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time on FS1. Got some Big Ten action for tomorrow as well, ladies and gentlemen. We love a good round 2 in tough love and rivalries, where Michigan won in overtime against Michigan State. I just want to get into that lineup and we'll just look at that game to kind of help us build an argument. I wouldn't say an argument, but how things are shaking out in the Big Ten right now, ladies and gentlemen. But in the Big Ten Conference, Michigan State shaky 9-5 for their overall conference record, but overall record's 20-5. Michigan, the Lady Wolverines, are 12-2, very solid, trailing behind UCLA in the conference, followed by Ohio State women's 11-2, very good record. So if Ohio State women's get some home court advantage, I'll definitely try to make my way out to their March Madness bid. I did it last year when they played Tennessee, though they fell short. But I was in a great section. I paid $39 to get in for the round of 32 when someone was selling your ticket. So I was happy being down low in the Schottenstein Center. So hopefully we get another opportunity to go in to embrace the women's tournament, which I said I love a great March Madness. I've been going pretty consistently, though the men's don't have one that's relatively close. I could be flying to Philly, but since, transitioning jobs and all that stuff, I probably won't be able to get to March Madness this year unless it's played in Columbus for the women's. But we'll get to keep that streak alive if the women's play like on a weekend or later in the evening when I get off work and I can jet it over, and if I don't have a late shift. But let's just take a quick look at the last time that these two teams met, if my things will take a quick peek on how they're looking at. But let's dive back into the last time that these two teams met to really drive home how things are shaking out between these two teams. Like from the field, Michigan shot better at the field at 57% compared to Michigan State's 51%. From the three-point line, ladies and gentlemen, Michigan State has a better three-point percentage during that game with a 46 compared to 41 from the three. However, Michigan didn't shoot well from the free throw line with a 52% from the free throw line. That's how you win or lose games, and that's why they went into overtime, because they didn't shoot well from the free throw line. Michigan State, on the other hand, shot 70% from the free throw line, Turnovers, relatively on average, about the same. Michigan had 20 turnovers. Michigan State had 18. Rebounds, relatively close with 36, and Michigan State had 32. Biggest lead for that game for Michigan was 8. Michigan State was 4. But, ladies and gentlemen, percentage led was driven by Michigan in that entire game, ladies and gentlemen. From start to finish, it was Michigan's game. When you look at the game, first quarter, Michigan was up 25 to 16 and 20. And then third quarter, it was tied with 23-23. And then Michigan State kind of pulled it back, but a little bit short with 17 to 16. And then in overtime, Michigan ended up winning 13-10 in the final overtime period. So I think Michigan will double take this and be like, we're going to pull out our Uno cards and pull 2 for your mistakes and beat Michigan State twice in this scenario. So give me Michigan State, who's number 7 in the nation, and Michigan State's number 13 in the nation. Women's college basketball, February 15th, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Pacific Time on FS1. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the game of the week, ladies and gentlemen, on Valentine's Day. Tough love in the SEC. South Carolina, number 3 in the nation, versus LSU, number 6 in the nation. Women's college basketball today, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 5:30 p.m. Pacific Time on ABC, ladies and gentlemen. What a game. What a game. Like I said, you just can't get much better than this. It's going to be electric. It's going to be fast-paced, hardcore action on the hoops, where turnovers, possessions, everything of this matters to big magnitude in this scenario. LSU trying to make a statement, trying to push for position in conference play. As I scroll down to the SEC, it's one of those things that it will make, or I wouldn't say make or break the season, but kind of drive if you kind of control your destiny in the tournament. South Carolina, 10-1 in SEC play. LSU, 8-3. It's okay. They're fine. Overall record, 22-3. South Carolina is 24-2. Overall, just doing fine, if you ask me. Having a good time, having a fun time. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is basketball. You got to find ways when it matters the most. You got to find ways to push, going above and beyond. We have a common opponent of A&M, both winning by 30 convincingly. LSU won by 33, 77-44. South Carolina won 81-53. That's what we're dealing with here, ladies and gentlemen. That's the magnitude of this game. The fierceness, the intensity. You just can't get around it. LSU averages almost 97 points per game, ladies and gentlemen. 97. That is a good team right there, ladies and gentlemen. From the field, they both shoot 52% from the field on average. South Carolina averages about 88 points per game, ladies and gentlemen. We got a classic right here. This, to me, is an ESPN classic. We're going to look back at it and be like, we have 2 good squads right here. I don't think we're going to overlook what's the magnitude of it. We got teams that are possibly in the Elite 8 or Final 4, depending how things go in March Madness and how the seeding goes for the women's side of the tournament. Now, points given up, South Carolina on the average is about 56 almost, and then, LSU about 58. You have rebounds. LSU rebounds a lot, out rebounds teams relatively with 49 rebounds per game compared to South Carolina's 43. However, on the assist front, LSU wins that category with 19 assists per game compared to, on average, to South Carolina's 18. However, the block parties goes to South Carolina about 6 blocks per game compared to LSU's 5.2 blocks per game. But both teams like to steal. LSU averages about 12.5 steals a game compared to South Carolina's 10 steals a game. So this game is going to be about how you shoot from the field. Can you capitalize on the turnovers when they matter the most? Can you keep your percentage well in this game? Will kind of drive how these two games go. I like South Carolina. They've been dominant in the SEC, only one loss in the SEC. But however, LSU's favored. I believe LSU's home. That's probably why they have a little bit of a slight edge with a 53.8% chance to win this game compared to South Carolina's 46.2% chance to win. But let's look at, the home record stand. LSU's 11-1 at home with a away record of 8-2. South Carolina's undefeated at home, but an 8-1 record on the road. So again, we got a classic on our hands. We got a game that could be really close, or it slips between one of these two teams' fingertips, and they just have a bad day from shooting later tonight. I know those women want to go out and have their Valentine's Day dates, but they might have to save it for tomorrow because they got to lock it and focus on this game. It kind of dictates on how you become a number one seed in the women's bracket. Your man or your lady might need to understand the magnitude of this game to figure out what they need to do to win. I guarantee you, the date's going to feel better once you win. I can tell you that. The date feels better when you win. You don't want to be depressed on Sunday saying, man, I wish I would have beat that team. Like, you don't want that for your dinner. No, you want to have a nice, good steak after this game. I know it's going to be like Central Time, like 10:30. So a lot of places are wrapping up, in their operations, but they might stay a little late for you rounding that out. But your date's going to be on Sunday most likely, unless they did it Friday. But I guarantee a lot of those women were focusing on this game. They know the magnitude, they know the intensity, and for them, their date's going to be on Sunday, and they're going to get that. And I guarantee they're going to have a great time. But one of these two squads is going to have a very sad Valentine's Day, and they won't be thinking about having that. They'll be having cold steak instead of warm steak. That's how this is. I guarantee how that's going to feel. But I like South Carolina to win this out in this tough love matchup in the SEC. Without further ado, let's close it on out of here today, ladies and gentlemen. You can catch this game tonight, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 5:30 p.m. Pacific Time on ABC. Like I said, great matchups today on today's show. A lot of great stuff coming through tomorrow on what we got. But Hardwood Gameday got a lot of good games right here for you this weekend. The games that I don't mention, there's tons of good games out there, but these are the games that will have you on the edge of the seat. Games that you might want to possibly want to try and bet, depending how it is. And possibly good payouts, depending how things go in your favor, looking for field goal percentage, rebounds, covering the spread. Look at these games. These games will definitely be more worthwhile, more entertaining compared to some of the games that haven't been mentioned. But again, go out and support the local community. Go out and support the smaller schools. If they're in your local area, take the time out of your day and go explore that smaller college campus. Go and support those student athletes. It means a lot to them to have fans fill the stadiums and have a good time. Like, go out and support and have a blast. Outside of that, also go support the local businesses in those communities. Like, go to that local bar, watch those games if you don't want to go inside of them. Or if you're there, go attend. Maybe your finances are not right, but again, try to support local businesses when you can. Support local restaurants on this Valentine's Day. Don't go to the main chains as best you can. I know we like our Applebee's, we love our Outback, but go to that local diner that's, I mean, it might not be the best Valentine's Day going to a local diner, but some people might enjoy a good diner date on Valentine's Day. So go out there, support the local business, support the local breweries as well. They are spending their time crafting their lovely brews and getting the right chemistry, the right balance to make the right beers for a lot of people as well as support, the local distilleries that make good cocktail drinks on Valentine's Day as well. Go support your bartenders, and also remember to tip your bartenders. Tip them well, because they're to serve you and have a good time as you build bonds with them and, help as they help you through certain things in life and give you good conversations. So definitely go support your bartenders and tip them well. But without further ado, thank you for attending this week's episode of Hardwood Game Day. I won't be on next week because I got a lot of things going on as I have a trip going out to San Diego. So I will most likely be out for 2 weeks, depending how things shake out on next Saturday. I got weekend plans that might deter me away from it, but I'll see how that shakes out. We might have to shift it around. We might have to shift it to Friday, but I'll talk with Nick to figure out how a lot of that will unfold and how that will kind of say. We might pre-record it and release it on, Saturday, so we still have it at that slot. So I'll work with Nick to figure that one out. But then after that, I will be in San Diego, California for work-related purposes. So I won't be on the 28th of Saturday of February. So we'll probably get some people to fill on. If not, we'll have a off show. And then when I get back, I'll have the opportunity to see if I'll do it. I might be a little bit jet lagged for being in the West Coast for 2 whole weeks. So we'll see how that works out for the Saturday on March 7th. But we might take that one, might do a little shorter show, just adjusting to all the jet lag and all that stuff. But again, thank you for so much supporting Hardwood Game Day. And we'll catch you all next time. So long for now. Bye-bye.